Welcome to BeEnriched, a learn-at-home project produced by the Wellness Institute of Greater Buffalo in cooperation with the Buffalo Public Schools and hosted by Buffalo Public School teachers. Your host for today's virtual field trip is Michele Agosto, Director of Arts for the Buffalo School System. Now please join Michele as she travels to fun and educational destinations throughout Western New York.
Hello BPS family, welcome to BeEnriched, a televised field trip program just for you. And I'm Michele Agosto, and I'm the Director of Arts for the Buffalo Public Schools. And I am here in the beautiful Shea's Performing Arts Center with a good friend of our department, Thembi Duncan, who's the Director of Arts Engagement and Education. Thank you, Thembi, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yay. So we are in the heart of the theater district, and Shea's Performing Arts Center is the biggest beat that happens in this district. But it's connected with two other theaters. It's Shea's Performing Arts, it's Shea's Smith Theater, and Shea's 710 Theater. Can you talk a little bit about each of the theaters and what they offer to people?
Sure. So Shea's Performing Arts Center includes the three theaters that you mentioned. We've got Shea's Buffalo, which is where we are now, and that is the historic theater that was built in 1925 and opened in 1926. And then there's Shea's Smith Theater, which is right next to Shea's Buffalo, which used to be a chalet restaurant. Very cute. And now we use it as a black box theater. It holds about just over 100 people comfortably. Nowadays, none, but certainly in pre-COVID days, it held that many people. Our Shea's Buffalo space can hold 3,019. Wow. And then we have our Shea's 710 space that used to be the Studio Arena Theater some years back, and that holds about 625 people. And that's actually on the end of the block at 710 Main, and that's why we call it Shea's 710. So we've got the two theaters kind of stuck together next to each other, and then down the block is our third.
Now you call the Smith Theater a black box theater. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
So black box theater is a theater that's meant to be very flexible, and you can move the seating around and you can change the whole feel of the space, whereas a theater which is called a proscenium usually is like a frame. That's our Shea's Buffalo Theater, and that's what you usually see in most theaters, where it's just a frame and the whole audience is on the other side and the frame is right there and we just watch that. Well, in a black box you can be in the middle of the action, you can be all around the action, it can be a runway. There's a lot of different ways to configure the audience, and so in a black box we say that it's more flexible with lighting and scenery and people. Now our 710 theater is a thrust theater, so that means that you've got people on three sides of the action. So that's where if you're in 710 you can be kind of on the side a little bit and the stage kind of juts out a bit. So there's all kinds of ways to enjoy theater, and we've got three different ways.
Yeah, it's really cool because each serves a different purpose, and you get a different sense when you're in there too, whether it's more intimate or just like you said, you're sitting and just watching a performance. That's pretty cool. I didn't know all of those things, so thank you for sharing that. So I want to go back to where we're sitting, and when it opened by a gentleman, I believe his name is Michael Shea. Mm-hmm. Michael Shea developed this and thought of this wondrous building, and actually it was called the Wonder Theater at some point because it was his dream, I guess, to create something like this. And it housed like all sorts of things in the 20s, like movies, and they had like really famous people like the Marx Brothers that maybe our young people don't know, but their parents and grandparents would know. And it was really like a happening place to be, right? Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about the transition, because there was a point where it kind of slowed down. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In the 1970s and 80s, Shea's Performing Arts Center sadly fell into some disrepair, and it was headed, unfortunately, to a place where maybe it wouldn't exist anymore. But the community loved and valued Shea's so much that a lot of volunteers came out to fight for Shea's to stay. So we got our historic designation in the 1970s, and since then we spent $30 million on restoring it to its former glory that we saw in 1926.
Wow.
Yeah, our restoration consultant used images from that time to rebuild and redesign. So all we had were those photos, and over years and years and years we just just detail by detail, you know, textile, floors, marble, everything, just detail by detail. And so what we have now is we're still restoring the building now. Because no one can come in for theater at the moment, we are doing some restoration work. So what I have here in my hand is a piece of plaster that if you come into Shea's or you look at our virtual tour, you'll see so much detail. Like even when people get a chance to look at the whole place, you'll see this detail all around. But sometimes, as it did in the 70s, and it's, you know, it's a building, it kind of starts deteriorating, so we have to keep it up. So we're very diligent about making sure that we keep things up. And this plaster is an example of how we'll take a rubber mold and hold it up against maybe the plaster next to it, if the plaster's good next to it, and then that'll give us the shape to replace it with. And so this is all around Shea's, and it's painted by hand in detail.
Wow,
So,
it's a labor of love.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So that's incredible, because it really does take certain artisans and craftspeople and to recreate a space. What I love about Shea's, there is this nostalgia, this like presence to this theater, but it houses shows that aren't always a traditional kind of show. So I was hoping you could share maybe one or two of your favorite shows that were presented here to our young people.
I have to say, my absolute favorite show is Hamilton.
Yeah.
My second favorite is Aladdin. I love the razzle dazzle. I love the huge scenery and then the choreography just going all over the place. I love the big show. Because we have 710 and Shea Smith, I love those smaller intimate stories as well, and I love how we can fit those stories to our spaces. So we've got that big stage. We had our stage house built out, and you know, we can get those big pieces in there, those big set pieces, and so why not go for it?
Yeah.
So I would say Hamilton and Aladdin.
Yeah, I would agree. Those are pretty awesome. I also like Phantom of the Opera,
Oh, yes.
which is a
Oh, yes.
classic. But because of what you just said, that they actually had to reconfigure the stage because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to house a show like that. Can you just in the next couple of maybe seconds describe why that was so important to change the stage for a show like that?
We needed to be able to extend the space behind where, if you're sitting in the audience, you look at the stage, you know, you only see what we've built out for you to see, but there's so much more space in the back where actors are running, and stage managers are directing, and you know, costumes are standing ready to jump into, and we needed the space to put those big set pieces like that big gigantic tower or a big helicopter in Miss Saigon. And in order to do that, we wanted to draw audience members from all over the region. In order to draw them, we had to get the big shows, right? Coming from Broadway. So if Broadway has a big show that they're bringing through and we can't fit the show into our theater, then it can't come. So we said, okay, this is worth the investment. We need to raise this money to extend our stage house. Now we're one of the biggest theaters in the country, and we can bring in those gigantic shows.
Yes.
And it makes a difference because we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of subscribers who come for those big shows.
Yes, and they are pretty amazing. Just as amazing as the space we're in right now and the wonderful chandeliers behind us. So thank you, Thembi, so much for sharing your time and your knowledge about Shea's, and we look forward to working with you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of the Community Action Organization of Western New York, the CAO. For more information on the CAO's five-pronged approach to fight poverty in the Buffalo area, log on to caowny.org. Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of Harmac Medical Products, an award-winning international contract manufacturer of single-use medical devices, located on Bailey Avenue on Buffalo's East Side. For more information, log on to harmac.com.
And now we're with Tracy Snyder, Managing Director of Theater of Youth. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled. So there's so much interesting information about Theater of Youth. You know, it's this beautiful children's theater that many of the children that are watching have been to. There's a lot of history to the theater itself and the space. So I wanted to talk about how it was founded, and it was really just founded by some college theater teachers, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, it was. No, it was founders, they just had a passion for working with children and teaching, and they actually started as a touring company that they would go into schools or go into community centers or parks and just just put on these shows for children. And then eventually they found a home, and then they bounced around from homes. And then it wasn't until 1999, the 90s, that the City of Buffalo and Theater of Youth formed a partnership that they decided to save the Allendale Theater and restore it. And then we moved in there in December of 1999, so we just celebrated our 20th anniversary at the Allendale this past year.
So happy anniversary.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the Allendale is a pretty interesting theater because that also has a lot of history similar to Shea's that we've just talked about.
It does.
So I know that there were, it was built in 1913, so a little earlier than Shea's, by a clothing retailer,
Yes.
which was, I thought, fascinating. His name is Levin Michaels, but he decided to follow like this neoclassical revival style, and there's like gold and glass and beautiful stuff. And it housed a lot of interesting shows, like vaudeville shows. Can
Exactly.
you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, sure, yeah. So the vaudeville circuit, Buffalo was huge on the vaudeville circuit, coming to Shea's, going to the Allendale, all of that, later for Shea's. But yeah, it was huge. And so vaudeville was different types of acts that would perform within an evening of entertainment. And it was everything from even animals that would do tricks to dancing brothers and sisters to dancing girls, and gorgeous costumes and things like that. So it also vaudeville and burlesque was also housed, and so all of these types of entertainment in the early 1900s. And so that was all at the Theater of Youth.
Right, that's great. And then there was a slowdown, again, similar to Shea's. And then we had volunteers that wanted to save the Allendale Theater,
Yes.
which allowed Theater of Youth to go there, or toy. People call it toy sometimes.
Right. In the 60s and 70s, before it closed down and was disrepair, just like Thembi was talking with Shea's, yeah, it was a movie house, and we actually have a couple ushers now that do work for us that remember it as a movie house, and they, took their kids and whatnot. So it's really interesting how Theater of Youth, we've been around for 48 years, and we do have generations of people that in one reincarnation or another, they have spent time and continue to be patrons of Theater of Youth and the historic Allendale Theater.
Yeah, that's impressive. So let's talk about Theater of Youth and the kinds of shows that we would see now. You cater to young people. You cater to almost babies,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
All the way to about 14 or so?
We do, yeah. Whether it is our main stage production or our education programming, we really try to tailor it so people have something for every age, whether it's K through 12. And our main stage shows, this past season, we focused on taking literary stories, books, and turning that into a stage production. So one of my favorites growing up was Miss Nelson is Missing, and so we were able to do that on stage. So children come into the theater, and we are Western New York's only professional theater for children and their families. So it is so important for children to have a place to go that it is about them, and they can see things on stage that makes them connect to their own lives, make them think about things in a different way. And we like to say we showcase things that are the wonders and worries of childhood. And so that's what we really focus on, and we try to tell their stories, and it's a unique bonding experience for families and friends to share with children as well. But it's a space for them to explore imagination.
And it is a space for them, because what's wonderful about your theater is that children are allowed to be children.
Yes.
So they can ask questions, they can ooh, they could ah, and then at the end they get to talk to some of the actors, right?
Exactly, yes. That's one of the great things that I love about it, is that we do offer a talk back. And it's been wonderful, because the past couple of years we've had an opportunity to show kids different behind the scenes things of what it takes to put on a show. So the actors take them through a little walkthrough of some of the special things that they might have seen during the show. But then we really open the floor up to give children a time to ask questions about how did this work? How did you do that? Anything that sparks their imagination they can ask about and really learn.
And that's the wonder.
That is.
Well, Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and sharing everything that Toy does.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of Harmac Medical Products, an award-winning international contract manufacturer of single-use medical devices, located on Bailey Avenue on Buffalo's East Side. For more information, log on to harmac.com.
So welcome back, everyone, to BeEnriched. And we're still here at Shea's, and we have a new friend with us from the Roycroft campus. It's Alana Nowicki, and he is the program director. And
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, just making sure. So Alan, I'm so happy you have joined us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Roycroft is really a pretty amazing place. It's not right in the city of Buffalo. It's in a place called East Aurora, so many of our kids would have to take a trip out there. But there's so much history, and I wanted to talk about it being the birthplace of the arts and crafts movement in
Right.
America. So in 1897, a really cool guy with a really cool hat, Albert Hubbard, who's an author, he was a lecturer, he was a writer, entrepreneur. He established this Roycroft campus for this arts and crafts movement. Can you talk a little bit about why he did that and why that was so important to him?
Sure. So just to do other connections with
Yeah.
other parts of Buffalo history. So he actually worked with his brother-in-law, a man by the name of John Larkin, at the Larkin Soap Company. Now he worked there for about 20 years, and in his mid-30s he started having somewhat of a midlife crisis, and he thought, do I want to sell soap for the rest of my life? So
He was a soap slinger.
He was a soap slinger, yes. So he decided he was going to leave the soap company, and the person he actually trained to take over for him at the soap company was a man by the name of Darwin Martin. And you've already been to the Martin house, so
Yes.
there's a connection there. So he ends up going on a trip to England, and while he's in England, he went to a place called the Kelmscott Press, which is where William Morris was working. And William Morris is considered the father of the arts and crafts movement.
Okay.
And the arts and crafts movement is more of a philosophy than it is a specific art style. And the philosophy was kind of a rebellion against the Industrial Revolution that was happening at the time. And products that had been handmade since the beginning of time were now being made by machines, and in their views, not very well. So they thought to have a beautiful life, you needed to surround yourself with all these handmade items. So this was the idea of the arts and crafts movement. So Albert Hubbard saw this and said, nobody's doing anything like this back in America. I'm going to come back to America and I'm going to set up my own Kelmscott Press, but he calls it the Roycroft Press.
Okay. And where did that word come from?
So Albert Hubbard says the name Roycroft is actually two words put together, or royal craft. The idea that something is so well made it is fit for royalty. So you put the best you can into your product.
High expectations.
High expectations, yes.
And so the people that were involved in that movement were called Roycrofters, is that
Yes.
right? Okay. And so I know that this particular group, they were highly talented, they were skilled technical professionals, and they're part of something called a guild.
Right.
And so can you explain what that is? What's a guild?
Sure. So a guild, much of the arts and crafts movement actually looks back at the old medieval times. And during the medieval times, there would be artist guilds in which artists that worked all in a similar media would get together and they would learn the skills together. They would take care of each other as they got older. So the same type of thing is happening today. So there's a variety of art guilds in which artists join together, and the same type of thing is that they're always learning with each other. They're learning how to be in an art show. They're learning how to put a portfolio together, much as like what we do in school.
Right. So do you have some examples that maybe you want to show us of what
Sure.
maybe we would find at the Roycroft?
Sure. So one of the main things that the Roycrofters were interested in was printing. So they did a lot of printing. They were creating their own books or their own posters like this. So what you see in black here would have been done on the printing press, but then they would go back and what's called hand illumine or paint, and they would paint all the additional colors in around the books or the posters.
So it's no computer graphics.
No computer
All hand-
graphics, no. They'd eventually get into everything from furniture to stained glass to coppersmithing to leather work.
Wow. And there's a special logo, right, or a stamp that I've noticed on many
Right.
of the pieces. Can you explain who created that and why that's so important?
So Elbert Hubbard started using that. That's actually was known as a printer's mark. So it was a mark that, kind of like a logo, that when somebody finished their artwork, they would stamp this to show that the work was finally completed. So Elbert had seen this in an old book. He eventually would borrow it and put an R in the center of the circle, and that was his logo that he would start using.
It's very famous.
It is.
So I know that there's an education component to Roycroft. Can you share really quickly what children can do when they get there if their families take them there?
Sure. So we offer tours of the campus. Most kids might be like, well, do I really want to do a tour? It's okay. There's also classes, so we do a lot of hands-on classes in the media in which the original Roycrofters worked. So everything from bookmaking to printing to gold illuminations to stained glass. We do stained glass classes both for adults and kids. So all these materials that might not be getting in school just because it can be expensive to try to do it.
It's fancy stuff.
It's fancy stuff, right? But to be able to create something like that and put beauty in your life just like the Roycrofters would have thought.
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan, for
Michele.
joining us today.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of KeyBank in partnership with the First Niagara Foundation. KeyBank, planning a better tomorrow for our clients, communities, and teammates. KeyBank opens doors. For info, log on to keybank.com. Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of the Community Action Organization of Western New York, the CAO. For more information on the CAO's 5-pronged approach to fight poverty in the Buffalo area, log on to caowny.org.
And now we're here with Bryan Lee. He's the curator for El Museo Francisco Oller y Diego Rivera. It's a long name.
It's a long name.
We call it lovingly El Museo.
That's right.
Can you talk, Bryan, I want to get right to the name. Can you talk about why the people who put this gallery together chose that name?
Yeah, so this all started in around the 1970s. There was a group of Latino students who were primarily involved with the university at Buffalo, who were just kind of looking around and wondering, we have all these arts institutions, we have all these galleries, why are there no Latino or Caribbean artists being shown? And so they decided to go their own way, and they started an organization that eventually became El Museo, and they named it after the Francisco Oller, who was one of the most prominent Puerto Rican painters of the time, and Diego Rivera, who was the most prominent painter from Mexico. And that's how that all started. So it's a long name. We go by El Museo for short, like you mentioned. So it was officially established in 1981. And then later on in the 1990s, the organization decided to broaden the mission to include artists of color and underserved artists more generally in our region.
Okay, so that's a very interesting history. So what I find fascinating about El Museo is that it exhibits local artists, it exhibits artists that are from marginalized communities, and it's also a gallery that's not afraid of making a statement through artwork that is shown there, which weirdly enough connects to the Roycrofters and Elbert Hubbard, because I think he was one who really made statements through his own particular work. So can you talk a little bit about what one would see at the gallery and some of the stuff that has fascinated you throughout the time you've been there?
So, El Museo does, primarily we do exhibitions. That's our main kind of product, or the main way we engage with the community. And so we might do anything from solo shows featuring one artist, or we might do group shows featuring 2 or 3 different artists whose work kind of plays off of each other. And then we also do kind of larger group shows that we do, for instance, with Buffalo Public Schools. We do a side-by-side teacher-student exhibition every spring. And so we try to capture the diversity, not just in terms of the identities of the artists, but also in what types of shows that you might see at a gallery. So you might see paintings, but you might also see photography, sculpture, new media, design, architecture. So that's kind of our field that we play in.
Right. And yeah, so it's not always art on the walls.
Exactly.
Because you've had things hanging from the ceilings, and you've had cushy things all around that it almost like performance art in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those kind of interesting exhibitions that are different from what one of our young people would think is art on a wall?
Certainly. So a few years ago, we did a show with an artist named Tommy Nguyen. He attended the university and later moved to New York City. And he had created this three-dimensional painting, if you will, where he got fabric and balloons and random objects and wrapped the entire surface, interior surface of the gallery, and created this kind of, crazy colored installation where he had performances, and it was a truly, crazy kind of experience. And then later, we were picking out staples from the walls for months afterwards, but it was worth it. And some of the other more interesting kind of formats we've done, for instance, a couple years ago, we had a show with a designer named Chris Lee who turned the whole gallery into a kind of exploded book. So if you imagine the experience of reading a book translated onto the gallery walls, in the way that the large information, small pieces of information all interacted. So it was really cool.
Yeah, that is fascinating. That's what makes it really interesting. And it's nice that you offer a space where artists can just explore in different ways.
Yeah, one of the things that I enjoy about our space is because the gallery, we've been in our space since 1997. It's a storefront space. It has really solid walls, and so a lot of times artists will come in and be like, can I put stuff all over the walls? Can I paint the walls? Can I make a big hole in here? And usually I say, yeah, let's do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's permission to be a little crazy.
Yeah, it's permission to get a little dirty.
Yeah, and be expressive.
Exactly.
So if a young person wants to visit, can they visit any time?
Yeah, so we're open Wednesday to Saturday afternoons. We usually have a new show going on every month to 2 months. Obviously this year it's been a little different, but we're back on schedule, and so you can expect to see something new almost every time you're there.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Bryan, I'll see you hopefully in March with our Buffalo Public
I
School
hope so.
students and
Fingers
teachers. And thank you so much for sharing your time and everything about El Museo with us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for watching BeEnriched, and we'll see you next time.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of Harmac Medical Products, an award-winning international contract manufacturer of single-use medical devices, located on Bailey Avenue on Buffalo's East Side. For more information, log on to harmac.com. Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of KeyBank in partnership with the First Niagara Foundation. KeyBank, planning a better tomorrow for our clients, communities, and teammates. KeyBank opens doors. For info, log on to keybank.com.